Okay, now it's Hobart's turn, who apparently also doesn't want to talk, sorry. We're going to talk about basic media writing and inverted pyramid, but first we're going to start with leads, because, we start at the beginning. News writing, leads and the inverted pyramid. So media writing comes in many shapes and forms, sort of these long form stories where a lead is something like the drug maker Purdue Pharma launched OxyContin 2 decades ago with a bold marketing claim. One dose relieves pain for 12 hours, more than twice as long as generic medications. Or, whoops, and there's the press release also that you can link to from that story. Or sometimes media writing is just something short, like Spin Magazine, where they're talking about Kanye and Kim, because, all sorts of things make news. Yep, there we go. Whole Foods is a company, of course, and so what you see on their website is produced by their strategic communication team. So their PR team, their communications team, but oftentimes it's written in a form that's very similar to news style. It's definitely a media writing style, and it focuses on storytelling and the most important facts. So we'll talk more about that as we move through the course as well. We still have long form stories. This story, 4,300 words, 17 minutes. This website, Long Reads, tells you how long they think it'll take you to read, and I think they read faster than I do. But still, we are willing to read long stories. For the most part, though, we're going to be talking about shorter formats. We're going to be talking about what the textbook has in a list as being right, accuracy, being tight, writing tight, being clear and active and smooth and quick. So we do this through something called the inverted pyramid. So the lead, or the first paragraph, is this part at the top of the inverted pyramid. So we go from the most important facts, sort of summarized into this one short paragraph, to then having supporting information as we move down. Quotes and supporting details, general background. We keep moving down the story. More on the structure of the inverted pyramid later, but let's start talking a little bit about the rules and the guidelines for leads. Now, they're really guidelines, not really hard and fast rules, but I love Pirates of the Caribbean. They're really more like guidelines. Here's some basic rules that we'll adhere to for leads. If we're talking about how many words do we have in a lead, 25 to 30. That's not terribly long, and we really go more on the short side for 25. Sentences. Generally, a lead, that first paragraph, is 1 or 2 sentences. And when we are writing for the eye, which is what we might call print or writing for online to be read, we talk about past tense for the most part, right? So for the most part, past tense, sometimes present and future tense if you need that. And when we're writing for the ear, which is broadcast, and that will come later because you hear it rather than reading it, we often use present tense. But again, sometimes past and future tense is appropriate. So we'll work more on that as we move through. One of the things I want to point out is that you may be accustomed to writing essays and doing more research writing. This could come as a shock to your system when you're writing media, because a research paper or an essay might have this type of first paragraph. That is daunting. That's actually the length of an entire story sometimes for media writing. In media writing, that first paragraph or lead is more like this. Quite short and succinct, oftentimes just one sentence. So when you look at your paper and you think, how can this be right? It's right. So let's think about what the lead is. It's some of the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Not all those things, because they aren't often all important, but the most important parts. So let's read this. A former child actor who was the voice of Charlie Brown in 3 major Peanuts specials is headed to prison, despite a last-ditch effort to withdraw his guilty plea to charges of making criminal threats. This could be a lead. I'll actually show you the actual lead in a minute, but this takes in the most important parts. A former child actor, he was the voice of Charlie Brown, which is why we would care about it, and that he's headed to prison. So when we look at this, the next paragraph would be, a judge sentenced him to almost 5 years in prison on Monday. So here's the basics. The next paragraph would give us some more detail. And we call this a summary lead with a delayed identification. That's because in this lead, we don't use the actor's name, in part because you wouldn't know who he is by his name. You know him as his character, Charlie Brown. So we often identify somebody as a San Marcos woman, a firefighter, right? We say what they are, who they are, and then use their names later. That's called delayed identification. So this lead is 38 words long if we use this as a lead. It's a little long. This actually ended up being the second paragraph of the story. So it's a little long, but sometimes that's fine, right? It's sort of in the neighborhood. This is actually the lead they used on the story, and I love this. 2 words, good grief, right? They did that. That's a creative lead because, of course, that was what Charlie Brown said. Oh, no, that was Lucy. She was always saying it about Charlie Brown. So creative leads break the rules, but they really can be effective. Yep, there's the lead. Good grief. Here's a whole bunch of glasses from my house. Now, I can drink milk out of my margarita glass, but I probably won't, right? So sometimes there's the appropriate cup for the appropriate beverage. The same thing is true of leads. You can write a different style of lead for any number of stories, but there is a lead that is often the most appropriate style. And so when we're talking about press releases and news leads, this summary or basic news lead is the appropriate style for this type of content. So you think about what the content is, who the audience is, the points you're trying to make, and you decide what type of lead, what structure of lead you want to use. There are more feature type leads that are more storytelling, and sometimes we say putting a face on it is a lead like this, but it requires something called a nut graph, and that is the nut paragraph, or sort of the meat of the story. What's this story really about? So here's the lead of this story. Brian Kennedy was surprised when he logged onto his Wells Fargo website to pay his mortgage and discovered he had a checking account he never asked for. That's a feature lead focusing on Brian Kennedy. Now, we don't know who he is, but we can use his name here because this story is telling you here, get to know Brian. This is what happened to him. And it happened to a bunch of other people too, right? So here's the nut graph of that story. Wells Fargo has agreed to pay $185 million in fines, and it's fired 5,300 employees after admitting they had secretly set up more than 2 million unauthorized accounts to meet sales targets. That's sort of the meat of the story, and that could be the lead, but for the fact that we've known this for a little while, so we're telling you more of the story by focusing on Brian. So a summary lead might be this. So this is newer with Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo has agreed to pay a $1 billion fine to federal regulators Friday over mortgage and auto loan violations that resulted in customers paying extra fees. This one we don't want to, get into somebody's story because this is just happening. So we'll use the basic or summary news lead format for that. Again, press releases and news. So you don't have to be boring, right? You still should give us some interesting information to help us through. With Trump's Supreme Court nominee that just happened, we've got USA Today's lead. On paper, Brett Michael Kavanaugh may be the most qualified Supreme Court nominee in generations. And then the story goes on to support that. Here's CNN. President Donald Trump has nominated Brett Kavanaugh to join the U.S. Supreme Court, setting the stage for a dramatic confirmation battle over a stalwart conservative who could shape the direction of the court for decades to come. So again, hits the high points and gives you some context for why this would be important. The main point is that this is the lead, and it has to be supported in the story. You can't make a claim or use a fact in the lead that you fail to back up later in the story. So this one little thing down here, all this has to support what you're putting up here. So here's some basic stuff, and then we'll explain as we move on down. And no, I don't know how they make that thing sit like that. So we will get more into what the actual organization of an inverted pyramid style looks like, because it can be, these pieces are sort of puzzle pieces. They can be put together in different orders depending on your needs. But still, the most important stuff is at the top.